"You don't belong here," my husband said at the resort, so I bought it in silence. The humid air hung thick and heavy, a tangible blanket pressing down on my skin as the sleek black car glided through manicured gates. I watched the opulent resort unfurl before me, a glittering mirage of infinity pools and impossibly green lawns, each element screaming wealth and exclusivity. My husband, Robert, sat beside me, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the approaching valet. The silence between us was a chasm, a familiar, suffocating presence that had grown wider with every passing year. I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my gut, that this trip wasn't about relaxation. It was a final, brutal assessment. He'd been dropping hints for months, veiled criticisms disguised as concern, but the words he finally spoke, sharp and dismissive as we pulled up to the grand entrance, sliced through me with surgical precision. "You don't belong here," he'd said, his voice devoid of warmth, his eyes sweeping over me as if I were a misplaced piece of luggage. The words, meant to wound, did more than that. They severed something vital within me, a fragile thread of self-worth I hadn't realized I'd been clinging to. I felt a strange calm descend, a disconnect from the opulent surroundings and the man beside me. The resort, with its pristine façade and hushed elegance, felt like a stage set for a play I was no longer cast in. I was an intruder in my own life, a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The air conditioning of the car, once a comfort, now felt like a cold, sterile embrace, mirroring the chill that had begun to spread from my heart outwards. I noticed the way Robert adjusted his tie, a nervous tic he'd developed when he was about to deliver a final blow. He didn't look at me, his focus entirely on the polished chrome of the resort's sign, as if preparing for a battle he was already assured of winning. My own hands, I realized, were clenched, the knuckles white, a silent testament to the storm raging beneath my composed exterior. The valet opened my door, his smile polite but distant, a professional mask that offered no solace. As I stepped out, the cacophony of my internal world was momentarily drowned out by the gentle lapping of water from a nearby fountain and the distant murmur of conversations, a symphony of lives that felt utterly alien to me. I was adrift, a solitary island in a sea of manufactured perfection, the weight of Robert's pronouncement a physical burden. The question wasn't just about fitting in at this exclusive enclave. It was about belonging anywhere, about finding a place where my existence wasn't a source of quiet disapproval. The path ahead, paved with expensive stone and lined with exotic flora, seemed to stretch into an uncertain future, a future where the only certainty was the echo of those three devastating words. This was not a vacation. It was an exile, self-imposed by the dismissal of the person I had built a life with. The sun beat down, intensifying the already oppressive atmosphere, and I felt a desperate primal urge to flee, to disappear before the full weight of my displacement could crush me. Yet, something held me rooted to the spot, a flicker of defiance born from the very rejection that sought to erase me. The opulent façade of the resort, so carefully constructed, now seemed vulnerable, a fragile shell that could crack under the pressure of a single unvarnished truth. My truth, perhaps, was waiting to be discovered, not in the polished surfaces and hushed tones of this gilded cage, but somewhere beyond its manicured borders. The scent of blooming jasmine, cloying and sweet, did little to mask the underlying aroma of desperation and quiet despair that permeated the air. It was a scent I had become all too familiar with, a perfume of unspoken resentments and deferred dreams. Robert, already engaged in a hushed, businesslike exchange with the concierge, offered no glance, no acknowledgement of my presence, as if I were merely an accessory to his arrival, a prop in his carefully curated life. My own reflection in the polished glass doors of the lobby seemed distorted, a stranger staring back with wide, uncertain eyes. The carefully chosen designer dress felt like a costume, a desperate attempt to blend into a world that had already deemed me an outsider. The weight of my husband's words settled deeper, not as a wound, but as a seed, a dark, potent seed that threatened to consume the fragile garden of my identity. I was at the precipice of something, a profound shift that was as terrifying as it was inevitable. The journey had begun, not with a step forward, but with a brutal push backward, a forced confrontation with the reality I had long avoided. The air, once merely humid, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, a prelude to a storm that was gathering not in the sky, but within the confines of my own unraveling world. This was the moment of reckoning. The stark, unvarnished truth laid bare against the backdrop of impossible luxury. A moment where the carefully constructed façade of my life began to crumble, revealing the raw, unformed self beneath. The very air seemed to vibrate with the unspoken question, where did I truly belong? And if not here, then where? The answer, I suspected, lay not in the opulent embrace of the resort, but in a silence far more profound than the one that currently suffocated me. The valet, his movements practiced and efficient, unloaded our luggage. Robert offered a curt nod, his attention already snagged by the beckoning glow of his phone. I watched him, a phantom in his peripheral vision, a detail he had long since learned to ignore. The grand lobby, all marble and gilded accents, seemed to swallow me whole. The hushed murmurs of other guests, their laughter light and effortless, felt like a foreign language. My flaw, I knew, was this very invisibility, this passive acceptance of my own erasure. I had built my life around Robert's desires, his ambitions, his pronouncements, allowing my own essence to erode until I was little more than a reflection of his expectations. His words, "You don't belong here," were not just an observation. They were a sentence. The consequence was immediate and visceral. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to grip the edge of a nearby polished table, its coolness a stark contrast to the heat flushing my cheeks. My carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter, not in a dramatic outburst, but in a quiet, internal implosion. I saw myself through his eyes then, a woman out of place, a social liability in his world of calculated perfection. The expensive silk of my dress suddenly felt cheap, a poor imitation of the effortless elegance he expected. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne, became suffocating. I needed air, real air, not this perfumed, artificial atmosphere. My gaze fell upon a small, discreet door tucked away in a corner of the lobby. A service entrance, perhaps, or a private lounge. It was an anomaly in this temple of uniformity, a crack in the polished veneer. A sudden, inexplicable impulse, a primal urge for escape, drew me towards it. Robert, still engrossed in his device, didn't notice my subtle shift, my silent withdrawal. He was already inhabiting his world, the world he had built, the world where I, apparently, was no longer welcome. The weight of his dismissal wasn't a sharp pain, but a dull, persistent ache, a chronic condition that had finally been diagnosed with brutal clarity. I clutched my small clutch bag, the leather smooth and cool against my clammy palm, a single anchor in the swirling chaos. The resort, with its endless amenities and curated experiences, suddenly felt like a gilded cage, a beautiful prison designed to highlight my own inadequacies. I imagined the conversations Robert would have, the subtle explanations he would offer to his associates about my unsuitability, the quiet shame he would feel. This was the fallout, the invisible damage inflicted by words spoken with casual cruelty. My body responded before my mind could fully process the implications. My legs carried me, not towards the opulent suite we were meant to inhabit, but towards that unassuming door. Each step was a silent rebellion, a physical manifestation of a soul recoiling from a verdict it could no longer bear to accept. The floor beneath my feet, a mosaic of intricate patterns, seemed to tilt, the world around me blurring at the edges. The laughter of other guests faded, replaced by the insistent thrumming of my own pulse, a frantic rhythm that mirrored my racing thoughts. The carefully constructed façade of our marriage, so long maintained for appearances, had finally cracked, and I was being offered a glimpse of the stark, unvarnished reality beneath. The consequences were not just emotional, they were existential. I was being asked to redefine my entire existence, to find a new center of gravity when the one I had relied on for so long had dissolved into dust. The opulent surroundings, meant to signify success and fulfillment, now served only to amplify my profound sense of displacement. The air, once merely warm, now felt heavy with unspoken accusations, each breath a reminder of my perceived failures. I reached the discreet door, its simple brass knob cool beneath my trembling fingers. It was a threshold, not into a forgotten corner of the resort, but into a new, terrifying and potentially liberating unknown. The decision to open it was not born of courage, but of a desperate need to escape the suffocating weight of Robert's judgment. The ensuing silence, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the resort, felt vast and expectant. A pregnant pause before the inevitable unraveling. The door swung inward with a soft click, revealing not a storage closet or a staff corridor, but a small, sun-drenched courtyard I hadn't seen from the lobby. It was a secret garden, a pocket of unexpected serenity tucked away from the resort's bustling façade. A single, ancient olive tree stood sentinel in the center, its gnarled branches reaching towards the impossibly blue sky. The air here was different, cleaner, infused with the earthy scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine, a fragrance far more authentic than the perfumed air inside. A small, weathered wooden table and 2 chairs sat beneath the tree, bathed in dappled sunlight. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a stark contrast to the performative luxury just steps away. As I stepped into the courtyard, the heavy weight on my chest seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. I sank into one of the chairs, the rough wood surprisingly comforting against my skin. My eyes traced the intricate patterns of the olive tree's bark, each groove a testament to time and resilience. This was not a place of judgment, but a sanctuary. I closed my eyes, focusing on the gentle rustling of leaves overhead, the chirping of unseen birds, the soft murmur of a hidden fountain. These were the sounds of an unhurried existence, a world apart from the frantic pace of my life with Robert. I took a deep, cleansing breath, the first truly free breath I had taken in what felt like years. My hands, still trembling slightly, lay open in my lap, no longer clenched in silent protest. A young woman, no older than myself, emerged from a small doorway I hadn't noticed before, carrying a tray laden with a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. She moved with an unhurried grace, her presence quiet and unobtrusive. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a depth of understanding that startled me. There was no pity, no judgment, only a gentle acknowledgement. She placed the tray on the table, her movements deliberate and calm. She didn't speak, her silence a profound counterpoint to Robert's dismissive words. Instead, she poured the water, the clear liquid catching the sunlight as it streamed into the glasses, and offered me one. I accepted it, my fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. The touch was electric, not in a romantic sense, but in its sheer, unadulterated humanity. It was a connection, a silent recognition of shared existence. She then turned and walked back through her doorway, disappearing as quietly as she had appeared, leaving me with the water, the sunlight, and the profound stillness of the courtyard. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, yet it resonated deeply within me. It was an act of simple kindness, offered without expectation or agenda. In that moment, the crushing weight of Robert's pronouncement began to recede, not erased, but diminished. The courtyard, with its quiet beauty and the silent woman's gesture, had offered a different perspective. It wasn't about belonging to a place of exclusive luxury. It was about finding a space where one could simply be. The water, cool and refreshing, tasted like a promise, a silent assurance that even in rejection there could be solace. My gaze drifted back to the olive tree, its enduring presence a silent lesson in weathering storms. The rough bark, the weathered branches, spoke of a life lived through seasons of hardship and renewal. It was a symbol of an inner strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The world outside this hidden courtyard, with its judgments and expectations, suddenly seemed less significant. Here, in this quiet pocket of peace, I felt a nascent sense of empathy stirring within me, not for myself, but for the woman who had offered me the water, for anyone who had ever felt on the outside looking in. Her silence, her simple act of pouring water, spoke volumes. It was an acknowledgement of my presence, a quiet affirmation of my right to exist, even if only in this hidden corner of the world. The profound silence of the courtyard, punctuated only by the gentle sounds of nature, began to fill the void left by Robert's harsh words. It was a healing silence, a space where I could begin to reconstruct the fractured pieces of my self-worth, not by force or by external validation, but by a quiet, internal acknowledgement of my own inherent value. The sun warmed my face, and for the first time since arriving I felt a flicker of something akin to hope. It was a fragile thing, easily extinguished, but it was there, a tiny ember glowing in the stillness. The water in my glass shimmered, reflecting the light, a miniature world of clarity and refreshment. A sudden commotion erupted from the main resort area, a jarring intrusion of loud laughter and clinking glasses. It was the sound of the world I had just escaped, a world of performative joy and superficial connections. The contrast was stark, and for a moment I felt a pang of fear, a primal urge to retreat back into the familiar, suffocating embrace of Robert's judgment. But then my gaze fell upon the woman who had given me the water. She stood by the doorway, her back to me, observing the scene with a quiet, almost imperceptible sadness in the slump of her shoulders. She was an employee, I realized, a part of the resort's machinery. Yet she possessed a dignity, a stillness that set her apart. The sounds of revelry intensified, and I saw Robert emerge from the resort's main entrance, scanning the grounds with an impatient frown. His eyes swept over the courtyard, pausing for a fraction of a second but not registering me, or the woman, as anything significant. He was looking for someone to cater to his needs, not to connect with. He turned away, his attention captured by a passing waiter, and disappeared around a corner. The moment of potential confrontation passed, leaving me with a profound sense of relief, but also a deeper understanding of the chasm between our worlds. I watched the woman by the door. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine across the dappled sunlight. There was no accusation in her gaze, no resentment for the intrusion, only a quiet understanding. She offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that spoke of shared experience, of a silent acknowledgement of the burdens we both carried, albeit in different ways. It was a moment of profound, unspoken connection. In that silent exchange, the last vestiges of my anger towards Robert began to dissolve, replaced by a weary empathy. His dismissiveness, his casual cruelty, stemmed not from some inherent evil, but from his own deep-seated insecurities, his desperate need to maintain control in a world he perceived as a constant threat. He didn't belong here either, not truly. He belonged to a performance, a carefully constructed illusion. My transformation wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, quiet unfolding, like the petals of a flower opening to the sun. It was in the way I no longer flinched at the distant laughter, the way I felt a quiet strength bloom within me, rooted in the simple act of being present, of existing in this tranquil space. The woman's nod was a catalyst, a silent permission to release the anger, to embrace the quiet resilience that had always been there, buried beneath layers of subservience. I felt a profound sense of release, a shedding of a skin I had outgrown. The courtyard, this secret sanctuary, had become more than just a place of refuge. It was a crucible where my old self was being dissolved, and a new one, forged in humility and quiet strength, was beginning to emerge. The weight of Robert's words had not disappeared, but it had transformed, no longer a crushing burden, but a scar, a reminder of a past hurt that had ultimately led to a profound healing. I looked at my hands, no longer clenched, but resting open on the table, palms up, a gesture of surrender and acceptance. The water in my glass had settled, its surface still and clear, reflecting the tranquil scene. The woman offered another faint nod, a silent farewell, and disappeared back through her door, leaving me alone with the olive tree and the lingering warmth of the sun. The sounds of the resort faded into a distant hum, no longer capable of disrupting the profound peace I had found. The weight of "you don't belong here" had been replaced by the quiet certainty of "I am here." The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the courtyard, painting the scene in hues of amber and rose. The air, still carrying the faint, sweet perfume of jasmine, felt lighter now, imbued with a sense of quiet resolution. I rose from the chair, my movements fluid and unhurried, a stark contrast to the tense, coiled energy I had arrived with. The courtyard, with its ancient olive tree and the memory of the silent woman's kindness, felt like a sacred space, a place of profound, internal reckoning. I didn't look back as I stepped through the discreet doorway, re-entering the main resort. The opulent lobby, which had moments before felt so alien and intimidating, now seemed less imposing, its grandeur dulled by the newfound clarity within me. The polished marble gleamed under the soft lights, but it no longer held the power to diminish me. Robert was nowhere in sight, likely absorbed in another business call or a networking opportunity, oblivious to the quiet transformation that had taken place just steps away. I found my way to our suite, the plush carpeting muffling my footsteps, the silence within its walls no longer oppressive but serene. The clothes Robert had selected for me lay neatly folded on the bed, a testament to his control, but they felt like a costume I was no longer willing to wear. I opened my suitcase, not to unpack, but to select something entirely my own, a simple linen dress I had packed on a whim, an act of rebellion that now felt like an act of profound self-preservation. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was not the same one who had arrived hours earlier. Her eyes held a new depth, a quiet confidence that had been absent before. The harshness of Robert's words had not broken me. It had instead cracked open the shell of my old self, revealing a core of resilience I hadn't known existed. The journey back from the courtyard was not a physical one, but a journey inward, a rediscovery of my own center. The empathy I had felt for the silent woman, and even for Robert's own desperate performance, had been the first seeds of my own liberation. The weight of his judgment had been transformed into a quiet understanding, a recognition that true belonging was not about fitting into a predefined mold, but about finding peace within oneself. I walked out of the suite, not with the aim of confronting Robert, but with the quiet intention of navigating my own path, of finding my own space, even within the confines of this gilded cage. The resort, once a symbol of my exclusion, now felt like a temporary stop, a place where I had encountered a truth that would set me free. The air outside the suite was still, carrying the faint scent of the ocean, a reminder of a world far larger and more complex than the one Robert sought to control. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking canvas of fiery oranges and soft purples. I stood on the balcony, the gentle sea breeze caressing my face, the distant murmur of the waves, a soothing balm. The opulent resort lay spread out below, a glittering tapestry of lights, but its allure had faded. My gaze wasn't fixed on the grand architecture or the manicured gardens, but on the vast, unending expanse of the ocean. It stretched out before me, a symbol of infinite possibility, of a journey just beginning. The weight of Robert's words, "You don't belong here," still echoed, but no longer as a condemnation. They were now a quiet whisper, a catalyst that had led me to this moment of profound internal freedom. The empathy I had found, not in grand pronouncements but in silent gestures, had become my anchor. The courtyard, the olive tree, the woman's knowing nod, they were etched into my memory, a quiet testament to the power of human connection, however fleeting. I inhaled deeply, the salty air filling my lungs, a promise of renewal. The ocean, vast and mysterious, held no judgment, only the endless rhythm of tides, a constant ebb and flow that mirrored the unfolding of life. I didn't need to belong to Robert's world or even to this resort. I belonged to myself, to the quiet strength I had discovered, to the horizon that beckoned with unspoken possibilities. The sea, in its boundless grace, whispered a single forgotten truth. Home was not a place, but a feeling. The salt spray kissed my face, a bracing counterpoint to the still, heavy air of the resort. I had left the balcony, drawn by an unseen current towards the periphery of the grounds, where the manicured perfection frayed into wilder, more untamed coastal scrub. This wasn't the pristine beach Robert would have favored, roped off and attended to, but a rugged stretch of shoreline where driftwood lay scattered like forgotten bones, and the tide had etched intricate, temporary sculptures into the sand. Here, the sounds of the resort were muted, reduced to a distant hum, replaced by the relentless, hypnotic rhythm of the waves crashing against ancient, sea-worn rocks. It was a symphony of raw, elemental power, a stark contrast to the artificial harmony I had left behind. My path led me to a small, secluded cove, almost entirely hidden from view. Nestled amongst the rocks was a single weathered fishing boat, its paint peeling, its hull scarred by countless voyages. It looked abandoned, a relic of a life lived in close communion with the sea, far removed from the air-conditioned opulence of my current surroundings. As I approached, I noticed a figure tending to the boat, a man whose weathered face was a roadmap of sun and wind, his hands calloused and strong as he mended a torn net. He didn't look up immediately, his focus entirely on the intricate task at hand, his movements economical and practiced. This was not the performative leisure of the resort guests. This was work, born of necessity and a deep, ingrained understanding of the sea's unforgiving nature. He was a living embodiment of a different kind of belonging, one forged not through acquisition or social standing, but through intimate knowledge and a respect for the elements. He finally raised his head, his eyes, the color of the deep ocean, meeting mine with a quiet curiosity, devoid of the judgment I had grown accustomed to. There was no pretense, no social artifice, just a simple, direct acknowledgement of my presence. He gestured with a nod towards the mending net, a silent invitation to observe. I moved closer, drawn by the quiet dignity of his labor. The torn strands of the net, once a symbol of brokenness, were being meticulously repaired, each knot a testament to patience and skill. It was a powerful metaphor for the process of mending oneself, of piecing together a fractured life. He spoke then, his voice raspy, like pebbles shifting on the shore. His words weren't about philosophy or grand pronouncements. They were practical observations about the sea, about the unpredictable nature of the tides, about the resilience required to navigate them. He spoke of how even the strongest nets could be torn by unexpected currents, but that the ability to repair them, to adapt, was what truly mattered. He didn't offer advice, but his words, grounded in the tangible reality of his life, resonated deeply, offering a different framework for understanding my own situation. He spoke of the sea's immense power, not as a threat, but as a force to be understood and respected. Now consider how this applies when you've been told you don't belong. It's easy to internalize that rejection, to believe you are fundamentally flawed, irreparable. But just as this fisherman's net can be mended, so too can the fissures within ourselves. The sea, in its vastness, doesn't judge the torn net. It simply continues its relentless cycle, offering a constant, powerful reminder that even in the face of damage, there is the possibility of renewal. The man's weathered hands, so adept at weaving strength back into his livelihood, became a silent symbol of a different kind of power. The power of quiet perseverance, of rebuilding from the ground up, not with grand gestures, but with steady, intentional action. He didn't preach. He simply was, a man in harmony with his environment, his actions speaking louder than any words of wisdom. The fisherman continued his work, the rhythm of his movements, a calming counterpoint to the ceaseless roar of the waves. He spoke again, his voice barely audible above the surf, about the subtle shifts in the wind, the changes in the water's color that signaled an approaching storm. He didn't fear these changes. He anticipated them, understood them, and prepared accordingly. This wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about developing an intimate knowledge of the forces at play and adapting one's approach to navigate them successfully. He explained that a boat, no matter how sturdy, could be dashed against the rocks if the captain underestimated the power of a rogue wave or failed to read the subtle signs of an impending tempest. Building on this, however, the true wisdom lay not in predicting every swell, but in cultivating an inner resilience, a capacity to adjust course when the unexpected occurred. He gestured towards the vast ocean, its surface shimmering under the fading light. "The sea," he rasped. "It gives and it takes. You learn to respect both." This wasn't a platitude. It was a hard-won truth, etched into the very fabric of his existence. He spoke of a time, years ago, when a sudden squall had capsized his boat. He had lost everything that day, his catch, his gear, nearly his life, but he had survived. And in the aftermath, amidst the wreckage and the profound sense of loss, he had found a renewed appreciation for the simple act of breathing, for the strength of his own will to endure. He didn't dwell on the misfortune, but on the lessons learned. He had learned to be more vigilant, to trust his instincts, and most importantly, to accept that some things are beyond our control, while others are not. Consequently, his approach to his livelihood, and indeed his life, had shifted. He became more attuned to the subtle cues, more respectful of the sea's immense power, and less reliant on sheer luck. This shift wasn't a dramatic overhaul, but a gradual refinement, a deepening of his understanding that came only through direct, often painful, experience. Now, consider how this applies when you find yourself adrift after a significant setback. It's tempting to become paralyzed by the loss, to curse the storm that capsized your life. But true strength, as exemplified by this fisherman, lies not in avoiding the storms, but in learning to navigate them, in adapting your sails when the winds shift, and in finding the inner fortitude to rebuild, even when the wreckage seems insurmountable. His story wasn't about overcoming adversity with brute force, but with a quiet, persistent wisdom, a deep understanding that life, like the sea, is a constant interplay of giving and taking, of calm and tempest. The calloused hands mending the net were a testament to this ongoing process, a visible reminder that even after the most devastating storms, the work of rebuilding, of finding new purpose, could begin. He offered no judgment on my presence in his rugged sanctuary, only a quiet sharing of his lived experience, a perspective forged in the crucible of the sea. The final lesson, etched not in words, but in the vast expanse of the sea and the quiet dignity of a life lived in its rhythm, is that belonging is an internal state, not an external decree. It is the courage to untangle the knots that bind us, to mend the tears that life inevitably inflicts, and to bloom like those wildflowers, not in spite of the harshness, but because of it. The horizon, once a symbol of my perceived exclusion, now beckons as a testament to infinite possibility, a reminder that the journey outward is always preceded by the journey inward. The true measure of our place in the world is not where we are told we belong, but the strength and grace with which we navigate the waters that are unique.